Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech and iOS 26.2.1 released to the public this week, along with iOS 26.3 Beta 3. But there's even more to talk about since the iOS 26.2.1 is out what's new video. We'll talk about the latest Apple news, we'll also talk about some new features, and we'll talk about the overall experience. Not just my experience, but your experience based off the YouTube community poll on the post page, where at the time of this video there's over 17,000 votes and 262 comments. I've gone over all the comments to determine what the update is like for all of us, so be sure to stick around toward the end of the video where I'll read some of your comments as well. Now, the famous Apple Cube store on 5th Avenue in New York City is closing overnight this coming week. The new hours for the week will be 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. so Apple can complete maintenance or preservation work according to Apple. Apple this week acquired a new company called Q.AI and their second largest acquisition ever next to Beats. The company worked on audio tech powered by AI. Apple supposedly paid $2 billion for the company, according to the Financial Times, and the purchase was confirmed by Apple in a report to Reuters. What they're planning to use it for is hard to say, but some of their patents relate to detecting what someone is saying just by the movements of their muscles and skin in their mouth. So you could potentially use Siri without saying the word, and then proceed with your request. However, the actual acquisition benefits will probably take a couple years to be seen, but it could include AirPods or other features in the future. Now, iPhone 17 models are simply staggering. Apple now has 2.5 billion devices active, according to Apple, on their quarterly earnings call. In fact, Apple has said the sales were so good with such high demand that it was simply staggering. Many thought the iPhone 17 Pro models would be a flop due to the design, but the sales demand are higher than ever, and it's a solid lineup this year and a nice upgrade from year to year. As we switch designs, we also got a big processor bump, camera updates, and much more. Tim Cook also said that the majority of users on supported iPhones are actively using Apple Intelligence. He said the most popular feature is visual intelligence. I admit I haven't used it that much. It's nice to have it, but I find that Gemini is a little bit better, and since they're using Google Search anyway, I typically use that. But it's nice to have, and in the future I think more and more people will use Apple Intelligence as it joins with Gemini to be used with that as well. Now that we have the new Apple Creator Studio that Apple launched this week with updates to Final Cut Pro, Pixelmator Pro, and others, Apple has discontinued their $200 Pro Apps bundle. It used to offer this to educators and students, and now it's no longer available. However, the deal for students is even better with Creator Studio at just $29 per year, with all of the recent apps both on Mac and iPad. So if you haven't tried this out, there's a few-month trial available as well, even on older devices. So if you have an older maybe iPad and you want to try out Pixelmator Pro on there or Final Cut, you can now do that for a few months. Apple also said something unexpected at the earnings call this past week. Tim Cook has said that his company will have opportunities to deliver innovations that have never been seen before. Whether this means we get more innovations finally or a one more thing this year, we just don't know. I certainly hope so, or he could just be referring to the iPhone Fold. But maybe something we didn't expect once they get Gemini up and running within Siri. Apple Watch hypertension notifications are now available in more countries. As of last Tuesday, if you're in Australia, Brazil, Colombia, Indonesia, Malaysia, South Korea, or Turkey, you'll now have the option to turn on hypertension notifications. It does require an Apple Watch Series 9 or later, or an Apple Watch Ultra 2 and later, and this feature actually worked for me after I turned it on. I never thought I would need this, but thankfully it was there, and I've been working on it ever since. You can see the hypertension notifications triggered on October 15th. Why it gave me 3 of them, I'm not sure, but then I went and checked my blood pressure, and I've been changing that ever since, and you'll see I don't have an update from that ever since. So that's something that I haven't seen since, which is great. I've been working to bring that down, and I'll talk more about that in the future. But if you're in an area that supports it and you have an Apple Watch that supports it, I'd recommend enabling it just to let you know if maybe you have hypertension or at least have the risk for it. As far as new features this week, there's a couple more to mention with iOS 26.3 Beta 3, and the first one has to do with the share sheet. If we go into Safari maybe, and then we go to share this, you'll see that we now have an option to view more. In previous updates, this was a little bit different. For example, on iOS 26.2.1, if we go to share on this device here, you'll see that more is a 3-dot menu, and then you can tap on it and it opens up like this. Now it's a compact menu, tap on it and it opens up differently. I think this is a much better way to showcase this, show that it does something else, and I think it just looks better overall. With iOS 26.2.1, Apple added AirTag 2 support or second generation support, and iOS 26.3 Beta 3 also adds this support. So that's been confirmed. We can test it out here. So if we go to Find My, you'll see AirTag 2, and if we play a sound, Now it's playing, so it works right away, works like you would expect. However, one thing I wanted to mention is how odd this is to add it to Apple Watch. You actually have to add it to your control center for some reason. So in order to use that Find Item option, go on your Apple Watch that's supported. You can then edit your Apple Watch and add them down here. So if you go into Edit, for example, you can find an AirTag, go into your plus there, go down until you find My. So we've got to scroll up here, Find Items, and then you'll see Find AirTag. This is the only way to use precision finding. So again, you can choose one, and then you can choose maybe this one here, then add it, and then we can add it here. So we'll tap done. You'll see I have it added a couple times. And so if we go into it, tap on it here, it automatically tries to find it. It takes just a second, and you'll see it recognizes it right away. Again, it's only in the control center. It's not within the Find Items app. So that's just an odd way of doing it, but I wanted to make sure you were aware in case you weren't able to find it. There's also a new feature in iOS 26.3 that will help you limit location for carrier tracking. And this is only on a few devices though. You need an Apple C1 or C1X device, which means an iPhone Air, iPhone 16e, or iPad Pro M5. Apple released a new support document that says limit precise location from cellular networks. It says what limit precise location does, and if we scroll down, it tells you what you need. So far you need an iPhone Air 16e or iPad Pro M5, like I mentioned, with cellular, but you also need a specific carrier. So in the US, it's only Boost Mobile, and you'll see a couple different ones here. But you can find this in cellular and then enable it, and then it will limit that tracking. So this is something I currently don't have as I'm not using Boost Mobile, but if you have one of these and you're on 26.3 Beta 3, you should see those options. This week I wanted to share a weekly iOS tip that will continue weekly from here on out. I wanted to show you how to speed up Safari this week. Maybe you're noticing that ProMotion doesn't seem to be active, or maybe it's just closer to 60 Hz and you have a ProMotion device. There may be a reason for that. If we go into our settings, then apps, and then Safari, I've got a shortcut that will bring us right there. I'll link that in the description, but if we scroll down all the way to advanced, within advanced, we go down to where we have feature flags, and within feature flags, we need to find one that's a little bit different called prefer page rendering updates near 60 FPS. So let's go ahead and find that. It's alphabetized here, and you'll see mine's enabled here. Prefer page rendering updates near 60 frames per second. Turn that off, and it should speed everything up. It should make it much smoother and much faster. So try that out and see if it helps. There's also one other thing I wanted to mention regarding iOS 26.3 Beta 3, that it actually breaks on certain devices. So if we go on to our iPhone here, we'll go to Apple's public-facing release notes. Apple later updated these, so if you take a look here, it says there's a known issue with continuity. The following continuity features do not work on iPhone 17, iPhone 17 Pro, iPhone 17 Pro Max, iPhone Air, and iPad Pro M5 with iOS or iPadOS 26.3 Beta 3. iPhone mirroring doesn't work, AirPlay mirroring to Apple TV 4K doesn't work, using continuity camera wirelessly with a Mac or Apple TV 4K doesn't work, and Sidecar doesn't work from Mac to iPad Pro M5. All of those things are broken in this update. They're aware of it, so hopefully they'll be fixed in the next one. But that's just an odd update. At least they're letting us know, but they're not letting us know about other issues. When it comes to releases this week, well, there were quite a few releases, not just public releases and beta releases, but releases we didn't expect as well to update older devices, specifically iOS 12.5.8, iOS and iPadOS 15.8.6, 16.7.13, and 18.7.4. Again, on Apple's release note website, you'll see here, if we scroll down, you can see all of the older versions listed here, 15.8.6, and specifically what these do is allow you to continue to use FaceTime and iMessage. It's a certificate upgrade, that's pretty much all it is, and allows you to continue using those versions on those devices. However, Apple pulled them after a couple of days due to an issue with some devices connecting to the carrier Telstra in Australia. However, later that day, Apple re-signed those updates, and all of them are working now except for one. So if you're on iOS 16.7.13, you may still have an issue upgrading to it if you haven't already, but it looks like Telstra identified an issue and then pushed out a carrier update for that. So that should be resolved now, and it should be back to normal except for 16.7.13. When it comes to future updates, if we take a look at the calendar, based on what we've seen in the past, I would expect either on Monday or Tuesday, we could see iOS 26.3 Beta 4 or RC. Based on the current build number, it looks like we could have a Beta 4, but an RC is still possible. If we get a Beta 4, the RC would be the following week and then a public release around the 16th. However, we could have a public release around the 9th if the RC is on the 2nd. We'll have to wait and see what Apple does with this, and of course, we'll wait for that update. After that is the big update with iOS 26.4, where we expect new emoji. We also expect Siri 2.0 next with the Gemini integration, and we expect that at least to be shown in February. Whether or not it launches before that or at the end of that month, we don't know. I would expect it probably sometime in March at that point. We also don't expect much more from iOS 27 this year, as we expect it to be more of a refinement update, but we can see that probably for the first time in June at WWDC 2026, typically around June 8th. We'll see iOS 27 Beta 1, which typically will release in September. So we can expect all of those things in the coming months here. When it comes to the AirPods Pro 3 experience, I've been using them full-time since they were new, and I've had very little issue with them with the latest firmware update, with the exception of today. I was editing a video with them today and listening to music at the same time while preparing notes, and had them start to crackle or degrade in overall quality. Some of the music was stuttering, and this is something I don't expect from them. I haven't had this happen until today, and it really isn't an issue typically. I had 2 iPhones near it next to my Mac. That's not usually an issue, but today it was. So let me know if you've had that experience recently. Again, this is just new today. It wasn't an issue before that. Now, when it comes to the iOS 18.7.4 experience, well, there's not much to say because no one can upgrade to it for the most part. It's only limited to a couple devices. So if you're on a device with iOS 18.7.3 like this one, and it supports iOS 26, you'll only get iOS 26 to download. There is no IPSW file in order to install or downgrade to 18.7.4, and there won't be going forward. So the last one was 18.7.3, or really the last over-the-air update for many people was iOS 18.7.2. So if you want the latest security updates, you'll have to upgrade with the exception of the iPhone XR, XS, and XS Max, as those are still supported since they don't support iOS 26. So at this point, iOS 18 is no longer available. I know a lot of people want to stay on it, but iOS 26 is getting much, much better. When it comes to the iOS 26.2.1 experience, I've been using it full-time this past week on my iPhone Air, and there's a few things that have been improved. For example, the keyboard lag has been greatly improved, according to many of you. So within Notes, this is the keyboard on iOS 26.2.1 on iPhone Air, and it seems to keep up. It's working better, autocorrect is working better, and many of you have said it's improved greatly. It's not perfect, but it's definitely better. RAM management has also improved. Quite a few people mentioned that as well, where maybe you'll go into music and it won't reload. Now it does reload still from time to time, more than I would like, but it's definitely better than iOS 26.2. ProMotion is also smoother for most people, whether you're in the app library or scrolling or anything else. And CarPlay seems to be better for many, with the exception of one thing where it becomes a little bit unresponsive when switching between Maps or Spotify or music. So sometimes when switching between different apps, it's a little bit unresponsive, but for the most part, people are saying it's working properly now like you would expect. There are still some bugs remaining. I've heard from quite a few of you that Wi-Fi is dropping on 26.2.1, where it will just randomly disconnect and reconnect. I haven't seen that on my devices, but many people are mentioning it. Also, those on iPhone 13 mini, iPhone 12 and older do report that the phone seems to be getting hotter than normal. This is most likely due to the update still indexing or processing in the background, and it's using more battery because of that, but it is something that's still happening. So on older devices, maybe it's taking a little bit longer, and it's going to be a little bit slower for a while. With iOS 26.3 Beta 3, the experience is pretty decent as well. The random resprings and reboots have been resolved this time around. So sometimes when I would go into Mail, for example, with 26.3 Beta 2, it would just respring the device and reboot back to the lock screen. Sometimes it would be some other app, it would just happen randomly. Everyone is saying that that's resolved now. The micro stutters are mostly gone, with the exception of maybe some older devices. It seems very smooth and fluid overall, so that's great to see. And then also, as far as bugs, the stutters are mostly only on older phones, like I mentioned, and what I mean by older phones is the 16 Pro and older. The processor just can't handle the new graphics, it seems, or it's just not refined enough when it comes to the code. The ever-present wallpaper bug is still not fixed. Now, some people have suggested this isn't an issue and it's meant to be that way, but it definitely isn't, as some people reported in feedback that they've heard that it's been resolved. However, it does not appear to be resolved, whether it's on 26.2.1 or 26.3 beta 3. It definitely desaturates a little bit. I'd say it's better than before, but it's still not fixed. Also with 26.3 beta 3, CarPlay works, but voice texting isn't working for some. So if you're trying to interact with Siri using voice texting, some people are just saying it doesn't work properly and they have to use their phone in order to do that when they pull over. So that's not great. Again, report that in feedback if you're still having an issue, and hopefully Apple will get to it very soon. When it comes to performance, well, we talked about it a bit already, but in general, it's very smooth and fluid, even on newer and older devices for the most part. It's not perfect. It's different depending on which device you have, what version you have, but both 26.2.1 and 26.3 seem super smooth. When it comes to heat and thermals, well, it varies depending on who you ask, but both of them are nice and cool at this point. iOS 26.2.1, only 1 in 10 people in the comments say that iPhone is getting hot, where 90% say it's much cooler. iOS 26.3 beta 3, 2 out of 10 people say it's still getting hot. So it seems to be improved. Most people are saying it's cooled down and isn't an issue. But let's go ahead and run benchmarks, see how it's heated up about halfway through. So with iPhone Air running iOS 26.2.1, it's right around 39 degrees Celsius. Typically it hits 40 degrees, so that's actually a little bit cooler than last week. And then if we take a look at iOS 26.3 beta 3 on iPhone 17 Pro Max, it's at the highest I saw 34.9 degrees Celsius. So pretty good overall, well within what it normally is, so well within the margin of error. Let's see what the benchmarks are like. Benchmarks completed, and you'll see on the iPhone 17 Pro Max, we have 9,672 for multi-core, 3,823 for single core. Compared to what we had before, when I ran it before, about 3 different times, it's actually about average and what we would expect. And with the iPhone Air, again, it's about average, doing pretty well for multi-core, a little higher than I typically get, but not the best I've seen. Now, when it comes to if you should install iOS 26.2.1, I would highly recommend it if you're on any version of iOS 26. It seems to be even more fluid, it's fixed many issues, and continues to get much, much better. With iOS 26.3 beta 3, I would only recommend this if you're already on iOS 26.3 betas. So if you're on beta 1 or 2, definitely install it. If not, I would wait for the RC or maybe beta 4 and see if it's much more reliable. But at this point, there's no reason to upgrade, as there's not a huge amount of features. There is some stability, some improvements, but 26.2.1 is what I would recommend at this point. Now, when it comes to battery life, with iOS 26.2.1, it's been pretty good overall. Thanks to Abhishek for sending this in. This is on an iPhone 16e with 100% battery health, charging to 100%. You'll see he got 7 hours and 53 minutes of screen on time, 1 hour and 3 minutes of screen off time, and used 76% of the battery. I'd say that's pretty phenomenal battery when it comes to that device in particular. That's what I would typically get on a 17 Pro Max. 55% of you have said that battery is better on this version. 45% say it's worse, but it's on older devices, so we don't really know what the battery health is like. If we take a look at 26.2.1 on my device, let's go back here. Again, we'll go to battery health. The iPhone Air has 100% capacity with 78 cycles. I'm not really getting great battery life myself, so you'll see here I had 3 hours and 25 minutes of screen active time, 1 hour and 24 minutes of screen idle time using 84%. The day before, again, about 3 hours. The day before that, 4 hours, but used 122%. I only get about 3.5 to 4.5 hours of screen on time with the iPhone Air. However, that is pretty typical if you look back to what it was before even this update, so it's not great overall. When it comes to iOS 26.3 beta 3, let's take a look at battery there. So on iOS 26.3 beta 3, thanks to Nate for sending this in, this is on an iPhone 17 Pro Max with 100% battery health, and you'll see he had 2 hours and 44 minutes of screen active time, 5 hours and 9 minutes of screen idle time, and used 45% of his battery. He used less battery typically, so he looks like he's a heavy user. Again, the next day, much, much better at 2 hours and 42 minutes of screen active time, at 2 hours and 57 minutes of screen idle time, using only 31% of the battery. So most people are seeing an increase in battery. Again, with the beta, 53% say battery has improved, 47% say it's worse. So again, it could be processing in the background, or it could just be worse than beta 2. Now, when it comes to the overall experience, let's take a look at some of your comments and see what you had to say. DH1RAJ V3RMA said, I'm honestly a little surprised by how much criticism iOS 26 is getting around battery life and the glass effect. From my experience, it's been really solid. I'm using iOS 26.2.1 on my iPhone 17 and iOS 26.3 Beta 3 on my iPhone 13. And both feel smooth and reliable. Even with my iPhone 13 at 88% battery health, I'm still getting about 5 to 6 hours of screen-on time, which I'm pretty happy with. Marcel Mercurgi 5090 said, after 3 days on iOS 26.2.1 on my iPhone Air, I can share with confidence that my battery life has suffered a bit. Elizabeth Kerville 8289 said, 26.2.1 is much smoother on my iPhone 11. Exiting apps is much smoother, battery is pretty good, gets me through the day, charging at night. Lokman Syed says, iOS 26.3 Beta 3 on my iPhone 17 Pro Max has been really stable. This is the first beta where I haven't experienced any major bugs, just some minor bugs. Battery life has been incredible and everything just feels very smooth. TTS292 said, iOS 26.3 Beta 3 is very smooth on my iPhone 11 and I'm experiencing no issues with battery life, opening apps and using VoiceOver are all smooth as well. Opening apps is snappier and my phone is sped up in terms of performance and I'm looking forward to iOS 26.4 with the new Siri and Google Gemini update. Plus, I'll soon be getting an iPhone 17 model, but I'm not sure which one yet. Scott Hagel 3254 said, iOS 26.3 Beta 3 running on a 12 Pro is working great. I have smooth performance, good connectivity, and great battery life. The only issue I continue to have since iOS 26 launched is that I cannot reorder the collections in the Photos app. Overall, I'm happy with this Beta 3 update. When it comes to storage, if you didn't take a look at the initial videos, let's go ahead and go to General and then iPhone Storage. If we scroll to the bottom, again on the left is 26.3 Beta 3, on the right is 26.2.1, and storage sizes are very comparable. 20.37 gigabytes on the iPhone Air, with Apple Intelligence taking up about 3 gigabytes less than 26.3 Beta 3. So that's what I'm seeing across all my devices. For some reason on this iPhone 17 Pro Max, it's taking up 3 gigabytes more on Apple Intelligence. With iOS 18.7.4, well, you can't update. Unless you have an iPhone XR, XS, or XS Max, there's no way to update, leaving all of the people on the older devices that want to stay on iOS 18 vulnerable to security update issues. So hopefully Apple would make that available, but it looks like if you need those security updates, which you probably should, you'll need to upgrade to iOS 26. With iOS 26.2.1, it's the feature fix this time around. It gets an A- as far as a grade, where the iOS 26.2.1 public release was designed primarily as a support patch for the new AirTag 2 and to address the catastrophic bugs found in 26.2. While it succeeded in fixing the keyboard lag for many people, improving RAM management for many, it remains a hit or miss experience overall. For users on the iPhone 17 Pro Max and iPhone Air and other 17 models, it feels like a finished product for the most part. But for those on iPhone 14 or 16 series, it often introduces new headaches like Wi-Fi dropping, persistent liquid glass UI stutters, and many other issues. With iOS 26.3 Beta 3, well, it's continued progress at this point. I'd give this an A at this point, with iOS 26.3 Beta 3 being a significant improvement over the buggy Beta 2, specifically fixing random reboots and random overheating. However, it did introduce a critical continuity bug that breaks features like iPhone mirroring that I mentioned before. It also adds that new limit precise location feature that hopefully will be on more phones soon, and I think it's going to get even better and sort of get us ready for iOS 26.4 and Siri that's Gemini powered. So I think it's just improving, and it is continued progress. Again, sadly, there's no way to downgrade if you don't like iOS 26. And so that's everything with iOS 26.2.1 and iOS 26.3 Beta 3. If you found any additional features, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. And of course, I'll link this wallpaper in the description like I normally do. If you haven't subscribed already though, please subscribe. And if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.